Again, this is another sign of the times, an analysis, and a commentary. America is still in trouble. We don't mean to, but we find it hard not to look around and wonder whether the recent turmoil in international markets isn't just the product of tremors, but rather of seismic shifts in the foundational pillars of the global system with highly unpredictable consequences. So, what if a bunch of errors are ending all at once? What if we're at the end of the 30-plus year era of high growth in China, and therefore China's ability to fuel global growth through its imports, exports, and purchases of commodities will be much less reliable in the future? Now that this debt bubble is unwinding, growth in China is going offline. Michael Pinto, president of Pinto Portfolio Strategies, wrote on CNBC.com last week. The problem is that China has accounted for 34% of global growth, and the nation's multiplier effect on emerging markets takes that number to over 50%. What if the $100 a barrel oil price era is over and all these countries whose economies were directly or indirectly propped up by those prices will have to learn to grow the old-fashioned way by making goods and services others want might to buy? Thanks to steady technological advances in America for fracking, horizontal drilling, and using big data to identify deposits, OPEC's pricing power has disappeared. Countries that have set their budgets based on $80 to $100 a barrel oil will find themselves vastly underfunded just when their populations in places like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Indonesia, and Venezuela have surged. What if average is over for countries? During the Cold War, you could be an average, newly independent state with artificial borders drawn by colonial powers. There were two superpowers ready to throw foreign aid at you. Educate your kids in America or Moscow. Build up your armed forces and security services and buy your crummy manufactured exports or commodities. But what if the rise of robots, software, and automation mean that these countries can't rely on manufacturing to create mass labor anymore? That the products they can make and sell can't compete with Chinese goods? That climate change is pressuring their ecosystems? And that neither Russia nor America wants to have anything to do with them because all either wins is a bill? Many of these frail artificial states don't correspond to any ethnic, cultural, linguistic, or demographic realities. They are caravan homes in a trailer park, built on slabs of concrete without real foundations or basements. And what you're seeing today with the acceleration of technology, climate change stresses, and globalization is the equivalent of a tornado going through a trailer park. Some of these states are just simply falling apart, and many of their people are now trying to cross the Mediterranean to escape their world of disorder and get into the world of order, particularly the European Union. But what if the EU era is over? Reuters reported this week that Germany is telling other EU countries that they don't prevent the influx of more refugees into Europe from the Mediterranean and relieve Berlin of the lonely task of housing refugees, Germany could shut its doors. Some Germans even want a border fence. One senior conservative was quoted as saying, "If you build a fence, it's the end of Europe as we know it." So, what if Iran's isolation is over, just as the Arab system is collapsing and the two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians is history? How will all those molecules interact? And what if all this is happening when the two-party system in America seems to be getting most of its energy from the far left and the far right? Bernie Sanders' platform is that we can solve our most onerous economic problems if we just tax the man more. Donald Trump and Ted Cruz are running on the theme that they are the man, the strong man, who can magically fix everything. What if our 2016 election ends up being between a socialist and a borderline fascist? Ideas that died in 1989 and 1945, respectively. And what if all of this is happening at a time when our government's ability to stimulate the economy through either monetary or fiscal policy is constrained? Unless we go to negative interest rates, the best the Fed can do now is rescind the tiny rate hike made in December. Meanwhile, after all the vital government spending to stimulate demand after the 2008 crisis, there's no consensus in the country for another big round. These what-ifs constitute the real policy landscape that will confront the next president. But here's the worst what-if. What if we're having a presidential election, but no one is even asking these questions, let alone what if all of these tectonic plates move at once? How will we generate growth, jobs, security, and resilience? There's still an opportunity for someone to lead by asking and answering all of these what-ifs, but the time is quickly coming to an end. And everything that must change quickly or rapidly and for the better, because it's still about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. And that should be a very important question to ask. And also, despite the burst of progress of the internet era, total factor productivity, which captures innovation's contribution to growth, has risen at about 1/3 the pace of the previous 5 decades. That's hardly the worst part of the story. The labor force will continue to decline as aging baby boomers leave the workforce and women's labor supply plateaus. And gains in education, an important driver of productivity that expanded sharply in the 20th century, will contribute little. Moreover, the growing concentration of income means that whatever the growth rate, most of the population will barely share in its fruits. Altogether, the disposable income of the bottom 99% of the population, which has expanded about 2% per year since the late 19th century, will expand over the next few decades at a rate little above zero. Growth in educational attainment, developed economy R&D intensity, and population are all likely to be slower in the future than in the past. And Ben S. Bernanke, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, who is now at the Brookings Institution, points out that long-term interest rates have been declining for a very long time. This is in response partly to the accumulation of savings in China and other developing economies, which have been buying treasury bonds hand over fist. But it also suggests that investors, whether they realize it or not, may agree with this proposition. People who invest money in the markets are saying the rate of return on capital investments is lower than it was 15 or 30 years ago, Mr. Bernanke said. And other strands of data point in this direction. The share of employment in companies less than 5 years old dropped from about 19% in 1982 to 11% in 2011. Also, it's not just that the income of our optimistic techno-entrepreneurs is growing faster than gross domestic product. A lot of new innovation, the rockets to vacations in orbit, the Apple Watch and Google Glass, also seems custom designed for them. If you're sitting in Silicon Valley, rich and at the frontier of technology, said Lawrence F. Katz of Harvard, it is probably true that things are getting better, but the same can't always be said for the rest of us. So then, America is still in trouble. Remember, there is a spiritual side to things too. Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 7. Yes, the The stork in the heaven knows her appointed times, and the turtle and the crane and the swallow observe the time of their coming. But my people know not the judgment of the Lord. 8. And how do you say, we are wise, and the law of the Lord is with us? Yes, certainly in vain made he it. The pen of the scribes is in vain. 9. The wise men are ashamed. They are dismayed and taken. Yes, they have rejected the word of the Lord, and what wisdom is in them. Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 4. Your descendants and people also are impudent and stubborn. I send you to them, and you shall say to them, Thus says the Lord God. 5. And whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house or nation, they will know that a prophet has been among them. 6. And you, son of man, be not afraid of them, nor be afraid of their words, though briars and thorns are with you, and you sit on scorpions. Be not afraid of their words, nor be dismayed at their looks, for they are a rebellious house. 7. And you shall speak my words to them, whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious nation. Again, it's time for prophecy to be fulfilled, and all these are more signs.